All right, well, we're going to kick off. Thank you all. Welcome to our first webinar of 2023. We are excited to be here. I'm Danielle. I am the account executive at Pixo, and I'm happy to help facilitate today's webinar. If you're not already familiar with Pixo, we are a software consultancy in Champaign-Urbana, and we create custom websites, software, and applications that really put people first and address unique challenges. Before we get into the meat of today, we wanted to run through a few details how today's going to work. So I am going to turn this over to Jenna to introduce herself and share a few items about our time together today.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming today. I'm Jenna. I'm the account coordinator here at Pixo, and I will be handling the details today. So I'll be popping some helpful information into the chat for you as our presenters run through their talks today. I'll also be sharing some follow-up materials after our time together today. You may have noticed the helpful voice when you came onto the Zoom that we are recording today. So I will be sharing that recording with everyone that attended today. If you have any colleagues that you think may find it helpful as well, I'm happy to forward it along. If you just point me to those folks, we're happy to share our knowledge. Also, if you have questions throughout the presentation today, you're welcome to share those in the chat. I'm going to be keeping an eye on those and making sure that we get to them at the end when we have our Q&A time. If you'd rather ask your question directly to one of the presenters, you're welcome to ask during that Q&A time at the end of the presentations. Come off mute and ask directly. And then if a question pops up after we leave today, you're welcome to email us or reply to the follow-up email I send. And lastly, and most excitingly, we are doing a giveaway at the end of our presentation today. So be sure to stick around to the very end. You may have a chance to win a free audit with one of our consultants today. And Danielle, if you want to explain a little bit more about that, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we talk more about tuning up your website in this webinar, we're going to learn about 5 different ways that you can look at that through content strategy, user experience, design, and engineering. So we're looking at some different options here. And if one of these resonates with you, we'd love to do an audit for you if that's helpful. But I'm very excited to get started on this topic today. Pixo, as I mentioned before, we create different types of technology, websites, apps, software, but most importantly, we think about the people that are using whatever it is we're creating first. So we advocate for websites to be easy to use, which really led us to our topic today and sharing more about how you can improve your website. And our 5 consultants are going to be explaining these different ways that you can audit your site and what those audits look like and why they're important. So we'll have Lindsey Markel speak today. She is a senior content strategist. Allie Ofisher is a lead user experience designer. Tyler Edwards is senior designer. Landi Najarro is a lead engineer. And Jason Rambeck is a senior consultant and lead web developer. Each of them will talk about a unique area based on their web expertise and show you how small changes can really have a big impact for the success of your website. So as we said in the title, it's just a tune-up and it can make all the difference. So I'm going to pass this over to Lindsey to get us started for the first insights and having your site run smoothly.
Hello. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Lindsey Markel. Like Danielle said, I'm a senior content strategist at Pixo, which means that I think about what goes on your website or in your digital product and who it's for and whether or not it's meeting goals. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, how to review and update your content and why to do it. So why does reviewing and updating your content matter? Well, if you have bad content on your site, then you have a bad site, full stop. And when I say content, what I mean is the stuff on your site, the text, the media, the things that make up your website, that populate your website. So the reasons that it matters that you review and update your content is number one, you've heard this if you've come to any webinar that I've been in, your content is not for you. It is for your audiences first and foremost. You don't build a website so that you can look at your website and say, I love my website, probably. And if you do, I do honestly love that for you. And I hope you keep doing that. But for most people, you need to connect with someone through your website. And that's why you have a website. Reviewing and updating your content keeps it equitable, keeps it understandable by the highest number of people. It clarifies the ownership of your site, who should be maintaining what in your organization. And it ensures that your site is supporting your organizational or business goals, because that is a great reason to have a site. And if it's not doing that, what are you doing? And if you are not updating and reviewing your content regularly, there's a lot of things that can happen. So these are things that we see all the time, totally common, and no shame in them because they're so common. It happens easily. It becomes a filing cabinet. It becomes a scrapbook. It just holds everything that it has ever held, and it never gets cleaned out, never gets sort of cut down or edited. You can lose sight of audience priorities if you're not thinking about them at least semi-regularly. A lot of things can fall out of date. Anytime you're using dates, names of contact people, links, they can get broken, things are inaccurate, people find your website, they can't use your website, it's unusable. The abandoned news or events page or the abandoned blog, someone once upon a time had good intentions and just didn't have the resources, didn't have the time, and that just, it reflects poorly on your organization and if your website looks abandoned. Lower readability, like I said, we want information to be equitable. So we want a lower bar of understanding for people when they're trying to consume what you want them to understand. You're missing opportunities to connect with your audiences, your customers, whoever it is. And ultimately, it just reflects negatively on your organization. If people see your website and it's disorganized and not maintained, they may think that you are disorganized and not maintained. And I know that's not true. So what can you do to do a sweep of your own site? Here's what I would recommend. Okay, this first one is going to sound intense, so grain of salt. Here's what I recommend. You simply make a list of all the pages on your site. Depending on the size of your site, this is going to sound either quite easy or completely impossible. So if it's too much, which it probably is for a lot of people, you can prioritize, like please prioritize. That's a lot of the message here. Prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. You can prioritize by using analytics, if you have Google Analytics installed or any sort of analytics, to see what pages your audiences are going to the most, or pick a high priority section. If you're a product company, pick the section that shows off your products or your checkout, your checkout journey. If you are a school, admissions content, etc. So pick a section of your site to sort of audit and review. And then review that content page by page. And it doesn't have to be super, super detailed, but here are some sort of metrics that you can use to think about that content. Number one is readability. So I said we want the information to be equitable. We want the highest number of people to understand the content that you're putting on your site. You want to lower the bar for understanding. There's a quote I love by a content strategist named Sarah Winters. Actually, I think she's Sarah Richards now, but she says, it's not dumbing down, it's opening up. We want to open up understanding to as many people as possible. And that means lower readability levels, yes. So 8th grade is the gold standard for just best practices of web content in general. I love and always recommend Hemingway, hemingwayapp.com. It's a free resource. It's just a web editor. You can type in there, you can paste your text in there, and you see on the right that here's an example. It rates the readability and gives you some suggestions for making it simpler, easier to read for folks. Next, you can take a look at your calls to action. Basically, what is the site guiding people to do next? Is it linking them to a section that they might be interested in? Is it prompting them to apply, to buy something, to contact you, whatever it is? Is it just clear on each page if there's a next step and what that step is? Do they feel guided? And there's 2 ways to think about this. What do they, your audience, your readers, your audience members want or need to do? And then also, what do you as an organization want or need them to do? What helps your business, your organization? And is it clear? Next is relevance, as in literally, does anyone care about this and why? If no one cares about it, well, I'll get to that in a second. If it doesn't serve a purpose for the reader, for the audience, you need to look really, really closely at that content and think, do we need this? How can we change it so it more clearly serves a purpose for the reader that we know they need? And then also, what goal does this support for the organization? All of your content has to do at least one of these things. It has to serve a purpose for the reader or for your organization. If it does both, we love that. That's the gold standard. That's the Venn diagram, like middle that we want. And furthermore, you can review your content for redundancy. So thinking about the topic of the page, don't be afraid of longer pages. A lot of people break up their content into a bunch of teeny tiny pages. And that just creates a bunch of teeny tiny pages that people have to navigate through. So don't be afraid of longer pages. If people are interested and need the content, they will navigate through your longer page until they find it. It's not a problem. So if you have a lot of smaller pages with similar topics, could we combine that content into, fewer pages? Or could we delete it altogether if you don't need it at all? We love that. We love to delete, prune, archive, whatever it is. Don't feel the need to keep it around. That's how your site becomes a filing cabinet. And if you can use some help with this, we do this. We can help with, if you don't know who your audience is, or you kind of know who your audience is, but you're not really sure what they need anymore, or you were once in tune with that and you don't feel in tune anymore, we can help with that. We can do all this for you and help guide you through it, make a list of your website, especially if it's big and it's a really overwhelming concept. We can do a general review, just sort of spot check your site based on best practices. And we can also think about what is the process for publishing on your site? Who's in charge of what? Do you know who maintains what page? Because that's also a great benefit of going through your site and sort of auditing the content, is you have to think, who is in charge of this page? And if no one's in charge, that's a problem. Barge, it's not a name. And I am going to pass it to my friend and yours, Allie Ofisher.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I am going to talk today about testing your site's navigation. So again, my name is Allie, and one of my jobs as a UX designer is to really help organizations achieve a good experience when it comes to navigating their websites or systems. And creating a good user experience requires a lot of intentional effort, shared understanding, and really a willingness to empathize and acknowledge that how you or I see the world isn't always the same as the people that are coming to your website see the world. So navigation, when I think about navigation, there's two things really the two primary ways you can navigate a website is through the primary navigation that's commonly always at the top of the page. And then there's also contextual navigation. So these are links that are inside the page that take you to other places and usually are a little more, those relationships in the page, that contextual navigation is showing you like, okay, we think you're gonna need this because of this content on the page, whereas the top navigation is like everything you might need at any moment. So both of these are really vital to find information and complete workflows, right, on a website. So I like to think of these as your doors and windows, or like side doors to a different room of your website. And without them, you would be stuck in one room of your house and you couldn't get out, which is very, very frustrating. So first, I just want to, you might be asking yourself, like, wait, well, why are websites so difficult to navigate? Why aren't they really clear like our houses that have actual windows and doors? So first, I want you to think about the keys in your house right now, or the keys that you use to get into your house right now. How would you explain to someone where they're at? So like, what would you describe? How would you tell them if you needed them to find them? Now, think about where's your most recent copy of your resume in the cloud. How would you tell someone to find that? So the two differences here is that one is talking about you're giving directions in a physical world, and the other's giving directions in this digital world. And if you're telling someone who's not familiar with how you personally have organized the structure of your folders on your computer or in the cloud, that's going to be harder for someone to locate, right? They're not familiar with that, and it's a little it's more abstract. So really, digital interfaces are the Wild West, in my opinion. Anyone can put anything anywhere, and this makes them very, very challenging to navigate and very unintuitive. And they're not like our physical world. And this is why people like me have a job because of that, because they're so difficult to navigate. And on top of that, people have unique mental models and positions in different domains. So how you experience and interpret an interface is likely not the same as someone else. And this is where a lot of organizations get into trouble, as we've seen. So I want to give you a quick way that you can assess your website's navigation today. And that step one is watching someone use your website. So it's one of the first questions I like to ask anyone we work with is like, have you observed someone interact with this? Before you invest any money into or any effort or time into changing or improving anything, you need to identify where those problems are. And to do that, you need to watch people use it. If you don't, the problem really is that you could be investing in these areas that aren't really giving people trouble and ignoring the areas that are probably going to be really frustrating for people. And sometimes these are just hidden. We don't know them because if you're someone that like knows your website inside and out and is using it every single day, you might not hit those same roadblocks as someone who just visits it for the first time. So to start, I recommend making a list of things people could be looking for or trying to do on your website. So those might pop up like really quick. You could start today on a scratch piece of paper. Just what do you think people are looking for? What information do they need? What's kind of the highest priority? And as Lindsay mentioned, also, what are you trying to get them to see or find? Like what's important for you that they need to be able to access? So this could be pages that are often referenced, links that people might need to do a certain task, things like that, and just make a laundry list. Get it all out there. You might need to ask some other people, but like just get that all out onto a list. And then I would suggest you play detective and try to find that information yourself. So for example, try using the search bar to find something if you have that on your website. So don't use the primary navigation at all. Just try to use search. And what terms would you put in? When you search that, do you find it? What if you try some other terms? Maybe not the first ones you came up with. Can you find that content then? The next, try using just the primary navigation, usually at the top, and see if you can get to, if those terms can get you to those items on that list that you know are important. And note like what terms are you looking for? What you might be used to your primary navigation, those terms. Question, be a detective here. Question like, is that an inside term that's just something my organization uses? Would someone normal like that isn't part of ingrained in our culture understand that? And then also when you get to certain pages, think about that contextual navigation. So is this content on this page related to something else? And can I easily get there? Is there a link in text? Is there a button on the page? Is it something like, again, where are those connected? That's really important. And if they're not, what would you expect to be connected there? So again, take notes of that. And really important though, is when you're going through this yourself, note things that you think are particularly going to be confusing. I like to call these assumptions. As I know on the screen, it says assumption list. You don't know if these are true for your users yet, but you can start with what is confusing to you and then go and test that. So just start again like, oh, this was easy for me. This was a little harder. Oh, but I think this might be harder for people and this is why. Get those down on paper because the next piece that we always do is then test those assumptions by observing real people using the website. This is called usability testing, and it is something that we offer and do. I love doing it. It's a great way to just see how people interpret your website. And you'll always find that, I'm always shocked at least, that how I've interpreted something is very different how someone else, or how they might go about navigating and finding something is very different. So you can also do a quick version of this yourself by asking someone, ideally it's someone that matches your audience, to try and complete a task using your website. This is not asking them what they think or what they like. Instead, just remember, this is just observing where they go and asking them to talk out loud about what they notice and what they're trying to do. So usually in these sessions, I am not prompting them in any way. I ask them a question like, hey, where would you go to find the weather today? You know, say I have a weather website. Where would you go to find what the weather's going to be at 4 p.m. today? And you just observe and watch them and ask them to talk out loud. And that's really it. And the great part though is you'll start to see patterns when you start to test and talk to more and more people. And that will help you identify that list of things that probably are giving people problems and frustrations. And those should be, in my opinion, at the top of your list to improve on. I did want to just call out some other audits that Pixo does that we can help with. The first being a UX audit. So this is a great way just to understand the usability of your site's navigation holistically. So this is something that I do to evaluate in general, like I said, how usable an interface is. Essentially, it's seeing it's a scale of severity and being able to identify, what areas might cause people problems. So then again, this is a great way to make that list and then go out and do some usability tests to confirm that those are actually causing people problems before you invest and start making changes to them. Another way to test your website's navigation is through a card sorting activity. And if you're not familiar with this, this really helps you better understand which terms resonate with your audience, since often terms used internally in your organization are not the same that someone outside your organization will use. So in this activity, essentially, you are giving participants a set of cards with terms on them, and you ask them to sort them into groups of like things. So you can start to see how things are related or terms that they're using that are similar. And the last thing that we do is a navigation flow audit. And this is really a great way to identify any broken relationships between pages in your contextual navigation. So what I talked about in the beginning, that on the page navigation, this type of audit is a way to take stock of what it currently is today and be able to identify where there are links or where there should be links and there currently aren't. So this isn't just an example, high-level view of what it looks like. It's not getting into the content on the page, but it's looking into how those pages are connected. All right, well, I'm going to hand it over to Tyler to talk about how design can help.
Thank you, Allie. Well, hey, yes, my name is Tyler Edwards. I'm the senior designer at Pixo, just like Danielle had mentioned before. It's my role to simply make things look the way that they look. So I'm here to ask the question, is your website's visual design serving to guide your users, or is it getting in the way? Is it aiding their experience, or is it hindering it? And when we start to consider how smooth a user's interaction will be with your website, everything we're talking about today, visual design is not often the first thing we consider, right? Content makes sense. User experience makes even more sense. We're just hearing about performance, accessibility, those facets usually sit at the top of this audit list. But the fact is, design plays a critical role when it comes to ensuring a smooth experience for your site visitors. And I'll say this and we'll go to the next slide here. Effective visual design, it enables our users to willingly and effortlessly engage with your content. Design is it's the tangible packaging and presentation of your content. It's the very first thing that your users are going to process and form opinions on well before they actually read any of your text. And I'm not talking about whether your website, looks good or looks bad. Those are just subjective opinions. Successful design must first elevate your message and invite your visitors to seamlessly interact with it. Pleasing aesthetics should serve that purpose first. Now you may be thinking about your website right now and you may think like, no, my website looks great. Maybe it's visually stunning on the surface. But if your styles are inconsistent or the hierarchy is confusing or it's impossible to read, then your design will only serve to hinder your visitors. But if the design works to produce a delightful and painless experience for your users when engaging with your content, then folks will read what they need to read and they'll get where they need to go. But how can I know if my design is serving that purpose? And I'm so glad you asked. That's such a good question. Wow. Thankfully, it's not too hard. And you don't even really need to be a designer to see it. So we'll go on to the next slide here. I've got 3 questions, just 3 simple questions you can ask to better discern whether your web design is helping or hindering the user's experience. So first, is your design visually consistent? Is there a unified system of styles that ties everything together? And do those styles clearly communicate the nature and the function of each element they represent? Now, your website may already have a pretty unified set of colors and typography that's based on your brand, right? And that's great. That's wonderful. However, there are certain elements and components that can easily become visually disorganized as we begin to add new content to a website over time. So buttons give us a really great example of this. Your website may have started out with a set amount of button styles like these right here. All right, you have this kind of special hero button, your primary, your secondary, tertiary, labels, all that kind of stuff. And each of those button styles were designed to communicate something specific about the kind of action that's attached to them, right? However, over time, you may introduce new components that you want to stand out from the rest, or maybe a new page that represents someone else's brand, or maybe you just hire some rogue designer who, he just wants to shake things up a bit. And as those things happen, new button styles and new link styles, they start to get created and added to the system. You begin to build this visual debt of elements. And that can be really confusing to your user because different styles communicate different things. Where a red button that once meant danger for some reason, it was an image from the internet, danger, I guess, is a danger button. There's now a perfectly harmless hero CTA there at the top that uses the same danger color. And that change requires your user to stop and process what they're seeing more often, which will inevitably erode their trust and cause them to be over it. And this is equally true for components and for your navigation and your page compositions. The more visual variety there is like this, the less understandable it will be. So we need to be on the lookout for these stylistic outliers and these excessive elements. Second question, is the hierarchy clear? Does your website's design help the user focus on the right things in the right order? So thoughtful visual hierarchy will do that. So here's what I mean by visual hierarchy. Here's an example here. This is a really helpful and fun one. So when we look at this image, our eyes will just naturally follow the pattern that the text expects us to, right? We read that big middle line first, and then the two bottom lines, and then we bounce back up to the top to read that small line there. And the designer accomplishes this with the right combination of size and color and space and composition. Now, here's an example of how the lack of hierarchy becomes a hindrance to our users on a website. It's just some random website. I found this. I mean, it's really incredible. Here we have just a really confusing amount of hierarchy here. There's very little difference in the size of our text here. And all of it is kind of strange to begin with. Your eyes kind of go immediately to the name of the website there at the top, EQV Learning, or this phone number over at the right. And then maybe it's drawn to this giant seal for some reason here in the middle. But then after that, the lack of color difference, having such just a flat color monochrome range here. The text sizes are roughly the same. Color is not actually being used to draw your attention. It's actually just being used everywhere. You really don't know where to go. You're thinking and processing so much here. There's also just a lot of content here. And so it's really hard to navigate around. Now, here's an example of what thoughtful visual hierarchy looks like. So right away, your eyes are drawn to this large text at the top. Linear is a better way to build products. We learn what the company's name is. We learn what they're about, and then we move down to this next line, tell me more about it. And then we've got a quick call to action. Let's get started. I continues to move down the page, and we see this graphic at the bottom, and then it jumps back to the top. We see this little bit of a label here above the title that maybe gives you a bit of an update. And then you see our primary navigation. And we have now processed this page in the order that the content desired us to, and we've gotten the right things first. So thoughtful hierarchy should also leverage the way that site visitors naturally read text, especially when there's a lot of it. So as our eyes move down a page, people tend to digest content, in an F or a Z pattern. And there's a lot of argument about right now, like, do people still read an F pattern or a Z pattern? If you want to get into the details of that, you can talk to me. It's a fun conversation for me. But we either read, from left to right as you would like a newspaper in this F pattern here, or we are more commonly scanning pages in this zigzag fashion. And so when we compose our content in a way that follows these patterns, then we can ensure that our users won't miss what's most important. All right. Third question, is the text readable? This one should be pretty simple. Now, Lindsey, just a moment ago, was talking about the readability of our text, right, in regards to the words themselves. We should also make sure that our text is visually readable. Like, is your design making your content illegible? So, for example, is the font too small, right? Or is it just really wacky and hard to read, like this slide? Are there images or graphics behind it, behind your content that cause the text to blend in? This is a menu, but I'm sure you've all seen something like this before, especially on the web. Like, cool image, bro, but I can't read any of that. Are the lines too long? And this can be pretty common, especially on large screens when we let our content stretch out really far. This can be an issue when you start to read at a long horizontal distance. Your eyes begin to move around and lose track of where you are. Is there enough contrast between the background color and the font color? Then we'll go to the next slide here. This one's absolutely huge and by far the most common issue. And this is a great example here that we're looking at. So this image here, this example, this is a decent web page, right? You know, it does have nice colors, good hierarchy, clear call to action, but that white text on top of that turquoise background just makes it very difficult to read. Like, the lack of contrast causes the text to nearly disappear into the background. And not only is it annoying, but this is a major accessibility violation, something that Landi's going to talk about here more in a moment. So a simple tool to help you determine appropriate text and background contrast is something that I'll just use. It's a website called Colorable. I'm going to share it in the chat there. Thank you, Jenna. So with this, you just need to drop in the color of your background and your text, and then Colorable will give you the rating according to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines scale. And on that scale, accessible text contrast should score no less than 4.5. 4.5:1 specifically. So you can see in this example here on the left, we failed. This text isn't working. It's at 2.26, but on the right here, choose a darker color on this turquoise, 5.8. Not only is it accessible, but it's going to be a lot easier to interact with. So to recap, these are just 3 simple questions to ask of your design to make sure that it's helping and it's not hindering your users from engaging with your content. Is your design visually consistent? Is the hierarchy clear? And is the text readable? Now, for all these things, this is something that we can really help out with. And not just these primary things here, but a lot of other nuanced things that when doing a design audit can really comb through your current website, find all of those all that visual debt and all that visual inconsistency. We really give a good idea for, what hierarchy is working and what is not. And we can really see, is your text accessible, and is the contrast right, and can you even read it? All things that we can really engage well with. So thank you. I'm going to move it on to Landi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Landi Najarro. I'm a lead software engineer, and I've been at Pixo for 9.5 years now, officially. I started interning before that, so it's closer to 10 for me at this lovely place. And I want to talk to you about accessibility. So Tyler mentioned that I would be talking a little bit about color contrast. Tyler talked about readability. Lindsey talked about readability. I'm going to talk about readability. It's amazing how much overlap all of these different disciplines have, but in the long run, it's all about the usability of your website, right? So it all kind of fits under this gigantic usability umbrella. So I'm talking about specifically accessibility. Is your site optimized for people with disabilities and assistive technologies? But what is accessibility and why does it matter? So web accessibility is the art of providing equal access and equal opportunity of web content to people with disabilities. There are about 1 billion people with disabilities on the planet, and the goal of an accessibility audit is to find and fix accessibility issues that create a barrier between your users with disabilities and your website. And notice that graphic on the right has all these different types of disabilities that someone could have. It is not an exhaustive list. It's just a couple of examples of what we mean when we say a user with a disability. What we want to do, what our goal is to create an equitable experience for all users, regardless of their abilities. And we have a lot of tools that aim to address the varying needs for those varying disabilities. So accessibility is for everyone. Anybody can become a part of the people with disabilities community at any time. Sometimes it's temporary, like broken mouse, fractured wrist, new parent. Sometimes it's a permanent disability, and making your site accessible also improves the overall UX or user experience on your site for all users. So accessibility really is for everyone. There are problems with an inaccessible site. If you don't make sure your site is accessible, you can have issues where people with disabilities in your target audience may be unable to interact with the elements on your site, or they may miss important information. Lindsey talked about different workflows. So one of them being going to school and registering or applying. If they don't have access to your form, or they can't read the correct form errors, they might not ever get to submit that application. You may also miss opportunities to connect with a large number of people, which can be really important. If you are unable to reach those people, they'll look elsewhere. So if your university is too hard to apply to, they might apply somewhere else, and then you miss out on that group of people. And then there's also legal ramifications. If you work in an industry that must comply with Section 508 accessibility requirements and ADA accessibility requirements, like higher ed, government, things like that, then you need to have your site up to code. Where do you start? There's so much when it comes to the world of disabilities, and I want to go over 3 main categories of disabilities. But the main thing to consider when you're building an accessible website would be to put yourself in the shoes of people with various disabilities and make some small changes to make it easier for those people. So first, we have motor disabilities. Imagine that you can only use your voice to control the computer, that you can move your arms pretty well, but you can't move your fingers, that you have no control of your arms and hands, and you have to use your mouth to control a computer with a stick. Then we have cognitive disabilities. Imagine that you have trouble with memorization, spelling, calculations, solving puzzles. And then we have the big one that Tyler was mentioning, the one that everybody usually thinks about when they think accessibility, visual disabilities. So imagine that you can't tell the difference between colors. They all look the same. There is no red and green, there's just gray. You can read, but only at 400% magnification. Or you can't read, or you can't read comfortably. You use a screen reader instead. And ask yourself, does your site accommodate these different scenarios? So ways that you can test these things. For motor disabilities, you can use keyboard only to check that you can access and interact with all elements on your website. If the keyboard can access it, then many other types of assistive technology can also access it, because those other technologies look to your computer like a keyboard input output. You can test on mobile devices. Sometimes elements are too small on mobile devices that even users without disabilities have trouble interacting with them properly. Like close ad buttons, anyone? It's one of my biggest pet peeves. Those are really hard to exit out of. I think they do that on purpose. They make it as small as they can possibly get away with so that you have to accidentally click on their content. Cognitive, use a readability analyzer to make sure your content is understandable. Lindsey earlier shared a Hemingway. I would say go for that one. This is one that I just found doing on the engineering side, but we all also use different tooling as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But when it comes to content, trust the content strategist. Her tool is probably far superior to mine. Another thing for cognitive disabilities, make sure you don't have auto advancing carousels. And we've seen these, they're also called sliders or slideshows. A slider is an actual different HTML component, but you think of like an auto advancing thing, dynamic content that's changing every few seconds. If you do have content that changes or moves, make sure that there is a way to pause or play the content, or make sure that you allow 3 seconds per word before the content changes. And that sounds like a lot. It is a lot of time, which is another reason we don't recommend doing something that auto advances or that changes frequently. And then visual. Use a color contrast checker to make sure that users with limited vision can see enough difference between your background and foreground. Colorable is a great tool. I also use that one. You could use a colorblind checker to see what users with different type of color blindness would see. And in this example tool, you'll see there's a drop down to say, well, which type of color blindness do you want to experience? And you choose that color, and then it'll show you what your combinations look like for a person with that specific visual disability. And then you can also use a screen reader to hear how a blind user experiences your website. So there are many different free screen readers out there. The one for Mac, which most Pixo Knots are on, is called VoiceOver. It's the same one that you'll use on any Apple device. So if you have an iPhone, it's the same tool. But they have different ones for all the different platforms. Then advanced testing. So like I mentioned before, not all testing tools are created equal. For example, all of the tools are implemented by some human's interpretation of the guidelines, which are ever changing. Not everybody interprets them the same way, and therefore not all tools will find the same bugs. But the goal is just to make your site as accessible as possible to create an equitable experience for all users, regardless of their abilities. So at Pixo, we have a team that understands Section 508, ADA, and WCAG standards that can help identify and improve accessibility issues. We created that little video that you just saw was an accessibility visualization tool to make it easier for people to see what accessibility features are available on their website. So when we talk about accessibility, a lot of this stuff is in the code. It's not stuff that you see visually, it's stuff that's hidden. And this visualization tool makes it easier for people to talk about because you can see what's going on. They're called accessibility bookmarklets, and it's called a bookmarklet because you can drag this little snippet of JavaScript code into your favorites or bookmarks bar and use it on any browser and just activate it, and it will highlight by drawing a little box with labels and information about your site, about what features are hidden. So that's really cool. We worked with the folks at DRES at the University of Illinois, Disabilities, Resources, and Educational Services to make this tool. We've also been working in the accessibility space for over a decade, constantly adapting as technology evolves. So if you need additional information or help bringing your site to accessibility compliance, or even just testing it in the first place, we offer many different types of supports, including audits, recommendations for fixes, quotes for the actual fixes. Depending on what your tech stack is, we might be able to fix them for you, and just that list of testing tools. So Jenna's going to share some of the tools that my colleagues haven't already shared with you. And then I'm kicking it over to Jason Rambeck.
Thank you, Landi. Yes, my name is Jason Rambeck, and I'm a senior consultant. I'm also a developer. And I'm going to be talking about this last area of experience that we're going to be talking about today that's important to audit from time to time, and that is performance, or how quickly pages load really on your website. Performance is really easy to overlook. It can often be an afterthought, even of the sort of building or initial design part of when we build a website, but it's also overlooked in our ongoing maintenance too. Performance is a foundational aspect of user experience, and it's really the first thing that people notice. Before they even see anything on your page, they're going to notice that they can't see anything on your page, or they can only see part of your page. And unfortunately, like other user experience areas, it's one of those things that people aren't going to shout about unless it's a bad experience. So let me show you some data here. So one study of user experience asked people to rank 5 areas, and these are them: the speed it takes to load a page, how easy it is to find what you're looking for, how well the page fits on your screen, how simple the site is to use, and how attractive the site looks. And consistently, they ranked page load or speed as the #1 issue of user experience. Another data point here that I think is really helpful to look at is how the likelihood that people will bounce or leave a page after waiting a certain period of time. So this all goes from 1 second to 3, or 1 second to 5, or 1 second to 6, that the likelihood of them leaving or bouncing increases. And I think one of the things to point out here is that this first range from 3 seconds to 5 seconds is triple. So this 3 to 5 second range is a big range for people to sort of say, hey, I'm out of here. And it looks like after 5 seconds, people are kind of like, well, I waited this long. maybe I'll hang around for a bit longer. So that's another good data point here to sort of help you understand how users act when pages take a little bit to load. So the other thing that I think is important to note is, and this is really with all of this user experience stuff that we've been talking about today, is the experience that people have with your website. It speaks to trust. And when a user is feeling frustrated with your site, that frustration often turns to some overall feeling towards your organization. So all of these areas that we've been talking about all deal with experiences that people have with your site. And I think I really like to tie that into trust. So it's important for us to pay attention to this kind of stuff and make sure that we're giving our users and our members or whatever kind of people that are visiting our site this feeling that they can trust us. So 3.7 seconds is the proverbial cliff of frustration when it comes to page load performance. A visitor that waits past 3.7 seconds, the clock starts ticking to their frustration just starts to rise very, very quickly. And the vast majority of websites do take longer than this, just so you know. So don't worry if yours does too, but it's a good number to keep in mind because this is the reality. So I guess a lot of us, everybody who visits websites, we're probably frustrated a lot. But really good websites do a really good job. And so if you want your website to be sort of in the top tier, this is a good number to keep on top of. So let's dig into something that you can do to audit your own website. There's a lot of great tools for measuring the speed and performance of your website. PageSpeed Insights, which is a tool by Google, is the best and the easiest for normal everyday people to just get some basic numbers. You know, gives you sort of seconds that things take to load, but even gives you a nice score for you to sort of indicates an overall health of the performance of your website. So if you've never used this tool before, you should use it today. So maybe wait till after this webinar is over and go check it out. You can plug in your just a page link to any of your pages or really any page on the internet, and just within seconds, it'll load the page and it'll rank give you all kinds of useful metrics and information, including just a general overall score. So let's look at sort of a sample report that this gives you, and we can kind of see how we can use this information. So this is the Google Ventures website. I thought I'd use one of Google's own websites. And this is kind of a marketing heavy website. So it does score pretty low. And I think it's probably a little bit less important to them, presumably, that it performs really well. But it was a good example to use sort of lower numbers here. So 38% or 38 is their score that they got here. And you can see just below that score, it sort of shows there's 3 categories of the score. They're in the red, which is definitely not where you want to be. Green is this 90 to 100 number. And that's actually really good to be in that. If you're there, you're kind of golden. And if you're in the upper areas of the yellow range, which is 50 to 90, you're pretty decent as well. These other numbers here below are, most of these are seconds, how long things take. First contentful paint is how long before anything sort of starts to show. And that's 6 seconds, which is well past that 3.7 or 3.7 seconds. Speed index is kind of a complicated number. We'll skip that one. And then largest contentful paint is when most of the page is loaded. You can kind of get into some geeky stuff here, but those are really good numbers to look at. This other one too, time to interactive, which is 8.4 seconds, is more important, especially if you have actions that your users need to take on a web page. So if you know they're going to your web page to do something, start filling out a form, do a search or something like that, they won't be able to do anything until this timed interactive. So if you're looking at a page and analyzing how quickly somebody's going to be able to do something, if it's reading, it might be 6 seconds here in this case, first contentful paint. If it's to do something, it's a little bit longer in 8.4 seconds. So there's lots more information on this page. This is sort of just the overview of this report. And one of the really nice things about this tool is that it gives you lots of helpful hints, even for the layperson, to what you can do. If you have a WordPress site, you can use this plugin. If you have, this, it sort of can detect things like that and help you out. So for us, and go to the next slide here, we use this report ourselves here as experts, industry experts, and we use this on our websites all the way through the design process, and even after when we're doing maintenance, to just check in on things. And so we can use the same information to help prioritize, which is probably the more difficult thing to do, is to identify which of the things, opportunities that we have to make things better on our website, to make them perform, and which one should we do first. It'll give us kind of the most bang for our buck. And this is kind of a list. Some of these things you might know, some of these are technical. So there is opportunity for people to do stuff on their own, just changing some things on your CMS. And then there's more difficult things that you can get into in the code or on their server to make things perform as well. So that's really it. We are happy to help. If anybody feels like their website's too slow, we've hopefully given you some tools that you can look at to do some stuff yourself. And we offer our services as well.
Thank you. Thank you. So we just have a recap slide here of 5 ways to review your website, whether it's you think you need to rebuild it, redesign it, or you've just launched a website, or you just want to check in. These are some great questions to ask yourself. I know there's been some questions, so I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. And should we do our audit wheel first and then dive into questions, Jenna? See who wins an audit and then jump into questions? Great.
Yeah, let's do it. So this is
spin the wheel.
A fun spin the wheel, literally called wheelofnames.com that we found. But something exciting is I figured out how to customize it with Pixo's colors. So that's exciting. So I have, hopefully nobody popped off. I have everybody's names on here. We're going to spin the wheel, and whoever it lands on gets a free audit. Yes, Landi did the test run yesterday and won a free ice cream, which was very exciting. So I will deliver on that promise, Landi. Okay, so get excited. Here we go. Woo! It's like Price is Right. Woo! Big winner. Congratulations, Heidi. We'll follow up with you. We know Heidi, so we know how to get in touch.
Perfect. I know we only have a few minutes, but obviously we covered a lot of information. I have not scrolled through chat. I don't know, Jenna, if you had any questions that had popped up, or if you would like to unmute yourself, we can always take questions live too.
Yeah, I didn't see any questions come through the chat. So if anybody has any questions after that wealth of information that came through, please feel free to ask them.
I had a question about, hi, I'm Andrew Reynolds from Illinois Public Media. I have a question about sort of how you approach content audits when they really sort of underscore some organizational mismatches or organizational problems. So I think in our case, the classic one is we have one side of the organization, one department that's really keeping pretty current with their content. It's really trying to stay fresh and relevant and integrate sort of all the platforms that they're on well with their content. And one that handles, it's a significant part of the organization, but they're not geared toward web content. And they produce a lot of event content and then say, put this on the web, and it's like, this isn't good, this isn't web content. And so how do you sort of approach that? Like, all right, it's time to sort of clear out the dead wood, but by clearing out that dead wood, you've really just kind of underscored that you've minimized the contributions of that part of your organization.
Yeah.
How do you balance that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would say it's easy for me to say sitting here, but I would say that's good. It's sort of good to clear out. I mean, that's I would say a primary function actually of going through your website is sort of to unearth the things that are not consistent within the organization. Even something like a content inventory or a content audit is something that our clients will be like, wow, this is kind of like therapy in good and bad ways, because when you have to go through and say, okay, who owns this? How often does this get updated? And then these sort of disparities come to light of, well, this this is sort of like going fallow over here, and this part is much more rich. I mean, the goal would be then to at least get everyone on the same page, even if the end definition is this page, you know, this section or whatever it is just isn't going to get updated as much, at least to unearth that and put it on paper and say, okay, is that okay with us, or are there other paths we can take? And I don't know what those paths could be, but you know, I don't know, we have a web committee and they help out with, you know, keeping up the maintenance on sections of the site that others just can't get to or don't have the resources to do or don't care about or whatever it is. But going through it forces you to reckon with those instead of just sort of secretly knowing that it's happening and not really sure what to do. So yeah, I mean, it's painful. It can be painful when you have those sort of disparities for sure, but it's better to see them, bring them to light than let
Yeah,
them
I
just
think
sort of go
I think
on.
that answers my sort of unasked question, or the part that I kind of glossed over, which is like, you know, do you have a preference for, you know, do you let the people who are ready to run, you know, just kind of go and leave that mismatch in place, or do you try to hold one side back, or like you maintain the balance, or do you just say like, no, this exists and we need to deal with it,
Yeah, I would
but
say
let's
it
keep moving?
depends on, yeah, I would say it depends on the organizational goals. You know, I was saying your website should, like, if it's really detrimental to Illinois public media, that this section of the site is just sort of, I keep saying the word fallow, I just like the word fallow, it's sort of like going fallow and not getting updated as much, then you need a plan. And if it's more of like a nice to have, you know, people have other ways of getting information from that section of the site, then I would say it's fine. You know, how high priority is that section of the site? Yeah, good question. Great question.
And I'll just chime in too that sometimes an outside source to help the internal struggle has been something we've played in the past
Definitely.
as well.
Definitely. Yeah.
There's another content related question in the chat about Chat GPT, another content related AIs. I don't know if anybody has this on their minds. I know I've had a few conversations about them this week. Do you expect AI like Chat GPT to play a significant role in website content generation as it keeps getting better?
Man, I wondered literally how long it would take for me to get a Chat GPT question, and it was not very long. I have no idea. I have no idea. Well, I have a little bit of an idea? I would say that, I don't know. I don't know. Right now, I feel like I don't know enough about it to give an informed opinion, certainly not from like my Pixo desk. Right now, I would say I am very wary of AI and like Chat GPT in particular for writing content right now. I would use it for like much higher level stuff, like maybe like placeholder content and wireframes, things like that. But I don't know, one of the reasons that I like this job is that I've always been like, and I'm not replaceable, because there are such nuances to content. So I really don't know the answer to that question ultimately. I feel kind of wary, but I'm also, I mean, I'm into AI. I hope that it gets better and better and we can use it for some things, but I don't see a world yet in which we're using it for significant content generation personally.
Well, I can hear the clock tower chimes chiming from Pixo here in downtown Urbana. I don't know if anybody else heard those, but going off
Definitely.
11 times, which means it's 11 o'clock. There was one more question in the chat that it looked like Jason was able to address. And then one more here, and it looked like Landi just addressed it. There we go,
Boom.
wrapping up. Danielle, I guess we can probably wrap up and you can give us our final instructions before we depart.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here. It was just a pleasure to be able to, like I said, host this webinar. If there are future topics you would like to see from Pixo, please reach out. We'd love to hear them. Just like we put technology and people together, I also want to give content that our people would like to hear. So we'd love suggestions. Thank you all so much for joining and have a great rest of your day.